thank you for charging it or whatever. Well, we still had a couple minutes. So.
And we're ready to go when you are.
Okay, good.
Where's it push? Yeah, no, it's underneath.
Good evening.
Oh, I thought it was here.
No,
Nice job on
that's if
your
you want
article.
to mute it.
Oh,
Oh,
it is?
oh.
Maybe I muted you.
roger that.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
you
actually
get better
received it in
with
the
this.
mail the other day. I'll take it.
Do you want to put
Hopefully
that
they'll get
between
better over time.
No, it's, we're good.
Take it for the first one. Yeah, that's for those.
Should I put it over here?
No, you're fine. Right there is good.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to this evening's study session. Our first agenda item is ADU follow-up. Community development staff is present to discuss the Accessory Dwelling Unit open house report. Good evening, Mr. Boberl. It's nice to have you.
Good evening, council members. In the interest of time, we've given you a lot of information in your packet, but because this is a fairly abbreviated session, we're going to just very briefly hit some highlights, reports on how our open houses went, and then we want to get into our questions that we have for you, and we'd like to have you have enough time to really get into the meat of the different options that we've presented to you. Planning and Zoning Commission worked on ADUs off and on for 3 years, starting in 2014. They were finally ready to go public with their recommendations, and it was decided that one of our commissioners suggested that we have an open house meeting, public forum for the public. And we held that on June 13th, and we advertised that in the first edition of the Inglewood Citizen magazine. And from that meeting, we got 41 completed citizen surveys. We didn't get any, the Planning and Zoning Commission analyzed the data and didn't see any red flags. And so they were ready to go ahead and have a public hearing, which was held on September 6th. And then they forwarded their recommendation based on that public hearing to City Council. On September 18th, we held a a study session with City Council to find out if Council was ready to go there and adopt some version of an ADU ordinance. You told us that you were not ready for that and that you'd like some more public input. So we went back to the drawing board and created another open house meeting, and we scheduled that for November 14th. And we advertised that meeting this time through a direct mailer postcard at the cost of $4,447.77, and that was mailed to every household in Inglewood. That did help boost the turnout, and we were able to get and collect 110 completed citizen surveys, and so that brought us to 151 total for both meetings. Our analysis was, once again, there weren't any red flags, no proposed regulation pulled below 50%. Interested in constructing, we had 94 of the 110, or 151 were interested in constructing an ADU on their own property, which is 62% of the collected surveys. People who are not interested but still favorable towards ADUs, we had 19 surveys that were like that. And then we had a group of people who said multi-unit zones only, do not put this in single family, and we had 13 of those surveys. And then we also had a group of people who, we had 20 who said we don't want ADUs anywhere in the city at all. 58 out of the 94 who are interested in constructing ADUs reside in the R1C zone district. And that is basically why the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended to allow ADUs in R1C as well as multi-unit zone districts based on two things. Number one was the locations of existing ADUs. The historical ADUs in Inglewood are mostly found within the R1C zone districts because those were built earlier in the 40s and 30s and 20s, as opposed to the more newer areas of the Inglewood south and northeast of the city. And also because of the demand that was being shown in the open house community meetings, 58 surveys were for people who reside in R1C zone district. And just for your reference, on page 9 of 28 of the packet, there is a map that shows the locations of the people who wanted to build ADUs on their properties. So tonight, we do know that an idea has been floated among council members regarding council holding a town hall meeting on ADUs with assistance from city staff. But regardless of that, and we'll find out that if that's what you want to do by the end of the meeting, I'm sure. But we also would like to pose these questions and get people to kind of go around and tell us where they are right now, how they're feeling about ADUs. So regarding regulations, our questions would be, is each council member generally comfortable with the regulatory parameters for ADUs recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission? Is there a specific proposed regulation that council would like to see revised, added, or removed? And then in regards to zone district options, what is each council member's position concerning each of the 4 zoning options that we've put out in this ADU memo? Option 1 is the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation of multi-unit zone districts plus all the R1C zone areas. Option 2, if that is too bold for council, you could also scale back the R1C to include only a limited portion of the R1C zone districts. And we have suggested that you may want to pick out only the R1C zone district areas that are in the comprehensive plan listed as transition zones. And that's a much smaller area. That's that orange on the map. Option 3, you can get even more conservative and say, we want to try this out first in only multi-unit zone districts only, the R3s and the R2s. Let's try it out in those districts, see how it goes, and if it goes well, we could consider expanding later on to R1C. And then finally, option 4 is maybe you subscribe to the theory that every person, every household in Inglewood should have the same right, and that ADUs should be allowed in all zone districts, including R1B and R1A. And so at this point, I would like to throw it open to the council.
Are there any comments or questions? I do have one question. I don't know if we know the answer. The 41 completed surveys from the first open house, did any of those people complete a survey at the second open house? So what I'm asking is, how many duplicates do we have?
I do not know the exact number off top of my head, but I do know that, yes, there were people who came to both and filled out surveys for both. And then in some cases, sometimes couples decided to fill out surveys separately, and other couples decided to fill out together. So we didn't regulate that.
Okay. Councilmember Barentine.
Did you include a copy of the survey?
No, I do not believe I did.
I would really like to have, was it the same exact survey from June end?
Pretty much.
Okay. I'd like to see the survey because that would make this a little bit easier to kind of figure out what they were answering in each one of those. Because one of the biggest complaints I got from people who said that they were not in favor of ADUs, they kind of felt that answering any of the other questions was kind of like, I don't want ADUs, but then I'm answering it like if I had to have ADUs, if it gets shoved on me, then here's the parameters I want. And I think that might have kind of gotten skewed in there, so I would like a copy of the survey.
Okay, we can do that.
Thanks.
Councilmember Olson.
You do have some in the PowerPoint. Is that everything?
It's not the actual survey where people were handed
the
out.
summary
It's the
of-
summary of what the results were.
So in terms of what's missing from the summary that you think?
I think Laurette just would like the original survey that people were given, the exact wording. That's what I'm understanding.
Comprehensive, thanks.
more questions or comments or answers to the questions that we've been asked? Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. One of the primary concerns that I've heard in terms of the owner occupancy is enforcement. And I didn't see any proposals on how we would go about enforcing that there is somebody residing in either the primary dwelling or that ADU dwelling. Have there been any ideas on that front?
Yes. So if someone was to come and apply for an ADU, they would have to sign an agreement, basically, that says that they will abide by the owner occupancy requirements, and they will have to file this with the county clerk. So this is a deed restriction on their property. If they decide to go and sell this property and they don't disclose this deed restriction on their property, the title search will find this in the county clerk's records. In terms of enforcement, we do have, today, we have about 180 existing ADUs from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And every year we send out a mailing to them to make sure, and they're supposed to fill out this form that says, are you still using this in the same way that you've been using it historically? And they fill out the card and send it back to us. So we do monitor not only the 180 existing ADUs, but any nonconformities in our database that there are in the city. So we get these cards back, and we can keep pretty good track of them. So we would institute something very similar for that. We would mail out a card every year to confirm that people are using the ADU in the correct way.
And if those 180 sent out, you get all 180 back? I wouldn't think so.
I don't do the mailing, so I don't know the answer to that.
So I guess then a follow-up question being, so if somebody does not return that form, one of those 180 people, what would be the follow-up there?
I think we'd have to check it out and see what's going on there. And see if they have stopped using it or if they're in violation.
In addition to Councilmember Barrington's request, if you don't mind even getting the last year's numbers of how many were sent out and how many were returned, and that what follow-up action is taken in those instances in which somebody does not return their card. I think there's a lot of neighbors that are supportive of ADUs. They just really wonder about how will the residency requirement be enforced, followed up on, what actions will take place if somebody is in violation of it, etc. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I've received some questions and concerns from folks regarding the two-story levels, so I guess the above garage units. What would be, I guess, some alternatives to that? Is it just we don't allow them above garages if we decide that that's an issue, or because there's no way to really, some of the concerns were due to, a neighbor lives next door, and then there's casts shadows or shade on their property, making their driveways icy and dangerous, and I think that's a legitimate concern.
Yes, that is an option that you could consider. You could consider just allowing one single-story ADUs. The Planning and Zoning Commission felt that they thought that people might want a little more flexibility in terms of maybe they want more open space in their properties, and that's a more efficient use of space by having the garage and then a second-story ADU. So yes, there's pros and cons to it. Actually.
Okay.
Councilmember Wink.
Thank you. So of the with the existing ADUs and your annual polling to establish or continue your knowledge of the owner occupancy rate, of those that have been returned to you, do you have any sense of what percentage of those remain owner occupant status, or what percentage change over time?
Yes, I was recently asked to perform such an analysis on whether our historical ADUs, what the percentage is that are currently owner occupied. And the way I did that was I used the Arapahoe County Assessor's database to compare the the situs address of the property with where their tax bill goes. And that's usually a good way to figure out, is the owner of the property living on that property? And the percentage that turned out to have the same address was 30% of the existing ADUs seem to be owner occupied at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine?
Currently require the current ADUs to be owner occupied?
We do not know.
We don't. And the card that is sent is only to ask them if they are currently still have an ADU on their property. If they are a non-conforming property, correct? That's that card that gets sent
If
out.
they're still using
and there
it
is
that
no enforcement requirement in this to follow up on. I mean, so you send that out to all of your non-conforming properties. They send it back and say, I'm still a non-conforming property. And that's pretty much it. There's not really anything to comply with or to follow up on.
In most cases, no. But there are a few different instances of a non-conforming use that has shut down and has elapsed for the amount of days. I think it's maybe 6 months to a year. They have lapsed, and they were no longer allowed to use it for that use. So we have a couple instances of that. But,
okay.
But you're
and
correct.
Are any of those
continue.
people that no longer are using their non-conforming use, which is well way above and beyond just the ADUs for non-conforming use properties, are any of them self-disclosing that they're no longer using the non-conforming use?
I do not know that.
Okay, so when we're expecting some kind of compliance piece, and what you give us as an example is something that really is kind of an apples to oranges kind of thing, but to Councilmember Cuesta's question, I would like to know how many of the non-conforming uses of any variety in the city have been taken away or done away with because they weren't in compliance with whatever the non-conforming use was. But right now we have no restrictions. I mean, there really, for the ADUs, there isn't anything to follow up on. There isn't anything to enforce. So those cards in no way, shape, or form perform any kind of compliance piece of anything. Information, but not really a compliance.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
It would be informational, and then that is up to code enforcement to react accordingly. And
I just don't want to give people a false sense of security that sending out the card in any way would maybe take care of the concerns of something that would then become a compliance piece to this property, where that's not the function of the card right now that it serves at this point. So I don't want to get
you're
too
right.
confused.
When it really comes down to it, the city would have to take action via the code enforcement group.
Well, they'd have to know first.
Right. But
You'd
the
have to
card
be able to
helps
prove somebody didn't
helps
live
to
there
know.
for 9 months of the year. You'd have to be able to prove that. You'd have to have some kind of other way of knowing that they're, I mean, there's several other criteria in here that would require a pretty intense kind of thing, well beyond just checking to see if somebody has a weed in the alley. Of whether somebody's lived on the property for 9 months or not is a whole different ballgame. So I do understand some people's concern. But thanks for clearing up the issue with the card.
So on the current ADUs that are, do we have enforcement criteria for them? I mean, do they have to be owner occupied?
No, they do not.
Okay, so do we know if they could be renting out both properties?
They could be.
Okay,
And that'd be totally legal.
okay. All right, any other comments about, do you have more questions?
Yeah, one more question.
Councilman
On that
Cuesta.
note, so if this were to pass, it seems that any one of the options has the owner residency built in. Would those folks who were not beholden to that requirement now be grandfathered in and not be beholden to that same requirement, or would that be applied retroactively to them as well?
No, the historical existing ADUs will be treated as they have been over time. We will make distinctions between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson?
Now, it's my interest of question too. So those who are grandfathered in, how do we get those separated out in a way that also, well, how would you separate those out? You have two, you're already sending a card that serves a purpose that I'm not sure I'm fully understanding why we send this card anyway, other than just to, but maybe you can explain it a little further than you did. But then I'm concerned that we don't have a process for the new ones that might come on, which I think there will be very few once people start to figure out how much it costs to do it. But who knows in the next 5 years?
I think you would have separate databases. You would continue to track the existing ADUs in its own database, and you'd have a separate database for the new ones, so you can keep track of them and
who would
distinguish.
keep track of that? Who would be in charge
Community
of that?
Development Department. And then, yes, the non-conforming use mailer, it is kind of on the honor system. But we've found, I think, historically that we haven't had a lot of problems where people's being dishonest on them. It is very true that when a non-conforming use is established, the theory is that it should go away someday, but the reality is that they mostly don't. They continue to use them in that way. We have had a couple instances, but it's only probably on, I could count them only on one hand, of a non-conforming use that has lapsed and then therefore is no longer allowed.
So, and those are held also by your office to keep track of them over time to make sure that it doesn't go back to the other thing, or how does that get?
Yes, we also, we keep track of things that no longer exist just in case for whatever purpose we might need, if it comes back up again or someone tries to restart that use. Sure, we continue to have that information in our database.
Would they be allowed to come back in if we were to approve one of these? Is their size part of the reason why they're not warming?
I think we would still want to treat them separately, and that they could not come back in if they stopped using the existing historical ADUs. We would not allow them to come back in.
Why not?
I think we just want to keep these things separate and very distinct, and we don't want to muddy the waters and get confused.
Okay, but they already have the structure to do it. Seems like I'm not trying to fight for it one way or the other. It just seems a little odd. I guess I'm hearing from all sides on this one. I would like to go forward with what planning and zoning has thought, but I would like to know what the process is for keeping track of all this, because I think it seems like a very big job. If we have these two different groups now, we're going to treat one differently, and if they've gone out of compliance, then again, there's actually a third group then. So you've got those that are already having them that are historically grandfathered, then you have a group that went out of compliance, and then you've got this whole new one. So I would like to know the process that we would go through to keep track of it all and make sure that we're serving the citizens well, and that we're not overtaxing, not overusing staffing for very few kinds of things that we don't have money for. I am hearing from people that they want this and that it's moving like they want it forward in a number of the areas that are set up for it, but really mixed in the R1 areas. Here to your aid. Maybe?
Did you have something to?
I do, Mayor.
Okay.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I just wanted to clarify one thing about the historic ADUs and their non-compliance if they went out and wanted to come back in. I think one of the things that, just talking in the back just now, is we would probably assume that if there's no change in use and if they just wanted to get compliant with the rules, I think that would be allowable and preferable. They just need to comply with the owner occupancy requirement at that point. So we would actually drive that 30% number up in terms of owner-occupied. The only time that we would, I think, really enforce against the historic noncompliance is if they wanted to redevelop the property. If they wanted to tear what's down there now and replace it, we would probably ask them to conform with the existing zoning. So that would be the distinction. If they wanted to redevelop the property and reconstruct something, then the noncompliance piece would be a much larger issue to take on, and that's the point we would probably enforce against the nonconforming use.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Berentine?
I'm grateful that Councilmember Olson brought that up, because I guess there was an assumption in all of this that if you have a lot of people who have them already, the 180, who have come out and said, I don't want to be a non-conforming use anymore. I want to be legit and legal, and this would make that. You also have people that believe that these ones that exist already would then be able to become the two-story thing, and they go, well, I have one next to me, but I don't mind it because it's little, but I would mind if it became this big thing because of where it's at and everything. So you have a little bit of both for the existing piece. But I guess I had to assume, I did assume with them that it kind of would include them a little. So part of the problem is that if we have, you're going to lose a big base of supporters for it, because the people who have them were thinking that they could go ahead and or they already had an in to go ahead and redo something. And I am concerned with some of the properties around them, because we have very few of these ADUs that they're not two-story buildings. They're little, they're small, and they're not intrusive. They're not going into somebody else's yard. They're not invading somebody else's property or shading anything. So we need to vet that out a little bit more, because this is the first time I really kind of understood that's a piece of it. I mean, just the owner-occupied piece of it, I heard from several people who at the very beginning were big proponents of it and said, no, if you make it owner-occupied, then I'm not interested anymore. If you're going to force me to go ahead and own this, I mean, and be obligated that if I sell it, it's got to be owner-occupied too, that's restricting me too much. So I would like to vet that information a little bit more, because that would be huge for the people that already have them, both for the people who are by one already, who were concerned that if this went through, that they would be able to go ahead and build one like what they were seeing to these standards. And I really heard pretty loud and clear at that meeting that people wanted something that was more of a town hall type setting, that all of the questions could be heard by an audience, and the answers to those questions answered at one time. There was a feeling from some people that there was a bit of, and not necessarily from staff, but other people that were in attendance, some salesmanship both ways on pro and against this. And they really wanted to get the information as a group all together and hearing other people's questions, just like now. I did not know until just now. I had assumed that the ADUs that currently existed would somehow be included in all this. So it matters to hear these kind of questions from other people, makes you more intelligent about what's going on, and that we do it as a group when we hear the answer. But I am concerned about the cost. I mean, $4,000 was a lot of money to send. There's some campaign people that have gotten cheaper. Maybe good. I didn't think the Inglewood Citizen was costing us that much just to mail out. I mean, that's incredible. So I really think that we need to have some more outreach with at least making sure that we have more of a town hall kind of presentation, so that everybody is getting this at one time, and we don't have all this back and forth. And I'm concerned, because this is just for that PDU was it last week or the week before?
PUD, you mean?
Whatever.
I knew what you meant.
Too many alphabet soup here, I'm sorry.
Public displays.
Yeah, anyway, it was a community meeting, and I mean, over 100 people showed up. And I mean, people are have some interest in this, and I want to make sure that we're vetting this properly, and with the compliance piece, so that they're hearing it all together, I think, is just a huge piece of it. So I would like to see something where we're getting some of this information out. And I don't want to go forward too fast with something when we're having something as significant as the historic ADUs, and just kind of realizing now how they would be affected in this process. But I know it's a work in process. I mean, I realize that, so I appreciate that. But that's what I would recommend that we do.
All right, thank you. I would just like to add also that I understand that Planning and Zoning has been working on this for 3 years, and I know that they would like to move it forward, and staff probably would like to move it forward also. I really do think it would be wise for us to have a town hall meeting with perhaps council and staff together, along the lines of the town hall meetings that when we had the marijuana issue a few years ago, because I have been getting some of the same feedback that Councilmember Barentine has about people. They felt separated out in these meetings that we had, and there is a piece to listening to other people ask questions, and it may very well be we could have a great turnout and not everybody would ask the same question, but they would all hear the questions and the answers, and it would satisfy that piece of it. So I would like to see a town hall meeting, and I know that in the scheme of things, 110 or 151 surveys for how many properties there are in Inglewood, that is not a lot. I mean, it may be a lot for normal turnout on things like this, but a lot of people have purchased properties and they're not worried about it. I mean, if they bought in R1A, they really don't pay attention. And so I know that several people came from R1A and wanted to build ADUs, but if the majority of people in R1A thought that was going to happen, there may be a bigger turnout. But I would like to see us do some sort of town hall meeting, and perhaps fairly soon. So, thank you. Councilmember Olson, I believe.
Thank you. When is our next citizen coming out?
Right now.
It is. We're in that point
Yeah.
right now. So is everything ready in it to go? So
It's in the mail. I mean, people are receiving it.
in the mail
People
even.
should be receiving
It came on the weekend.
When does the next one come?
May.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out if we could capitalize on that for the mailing. It doesn't, and this is big enough in my mind, affecting every single home in the city of Englewood, that $4,000, yes, does seem like a lot, but in the long run, it's probably the better thing. But it would be surely nice to have something in the Citizen to explain what ADUs are, have a little bit more real estate in that magazine to give the options and what the owner occupied versus other things, to try and summarize it in a clearer way for everybody. Because people, I think, do we know what the readership is now? I mean, we used to be able to tell with the Citizen that at 80-some%, that isn't a question we probably asked in the national survey, is it? So
I mean, it reaches over 17,000.
Well, we know it
distinct
reaches them,
addresses,
but how many actually read it? You can't
couldn't
figure
tell
it
you.
out in a hard copy, but
Yeah.
so I would prefer to see one more round. I'm sure it's the last thing you want to hear. You all have done a wonderful job of continuing to do this over and over. It's not about that, but I just hear a lot if they're talking about ADUs and know about them. For those that don't, I talked to 2 people this weekend. They said, "What's an ADU?" I'm like, oh. So I'm nervous that that people really don't understand what's about yet to come. I think that I'm moving forward to say I think we need to do something in this area and allow for some uses, but I want to hear more.
Thank you, Councilman Wilson.
I'm going to wait until the end. I want to talk about the
Okay.
town hall a little bit, but I want to wait till we talk.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I just had a question. Of the folks who attended the meetings, do we know how many of them are owners of properties that have existing ADUs now?
You know, I think I remember seeing one survey that the person was an owner of an existing ADU, but I don't think that was about it.
That seems very low. I think I would assume that the folks, especially who have existing ADUs, would want to be involved more in this discussion, so maybe they're just not aware that it's going on. So I think if we have something else, maybe it's reach out to those individual homeowners that this is going on, and we would like their feedback.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson.
I don't know that I want to do another survey, but there are some other key questions that could be used to get a little bit more information, such as, do you own one now? Are you a developer? We know who are you, but you did get some of that info. Not all of it, though. There seems to be a little bit more segmenting that could be helpful, broadening categories maybe. But to be honest, this is the kind of thing where I wish we had the town hall format for the online, what's it called, where we could just keep getting feedback, but no, it's from separate people, but it doesn't help.
You know, at the first ADU meeting, we had 41. When I said we had 41 Inglewood citizen surveys completed. We actually had more surveys turned in, but they were people that lived outside of Inglewood who are ADU advocates, and they got wind of this.
Okay.
But we of course we don't count them in our Inglewood citizen
Thank you
surveys.
for telling us that. Yeah. I am really thankful for the work that everybody's been doing on this.
Yes.
I know that Planning and Zoning's been working on it for a while, but not alone. I mean, they've been chipping away at it. I also still would love to see some comparative cities, and I know we had done. Is there another document? Did we have that at the last time we talked about this? Because I've been reading stuff, but did I read my own stuff? Did you have any? There's a recent Denver Post article about how much these things cost.
I don't believe that we've put it together any comparative information for you, but
Okay.
we did do that for P&Z.
For P&Z.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could get some of that info for us too, just for background, whatever they were given, that we'd see that too. Because I'm putting a whole file together that I've started to gather, and would love to see any other examples of cities in different ways that they've handled. I'm sure that they've looked. That's how they came up with what they came up with.
Yes.
Are you referring to your Hub article?
No, there was another. I don't think it was a UHub. I think
It was a Denver Post.
It's a Denver
reporter.
Post article. Yeah, in the last month, I think even. I can find
Might
it.
have been time flies, Linda.
Yeah,
Might have been a little bit more, but
Having fun.
I remember what it was because it was the cost.
The cost was like, whoa, right? Do people have any idea? And I was wondering if that would be true for our residents and the kinds of lots and the kind of style of things. Hey,
And not cheap.
Yeah, you've all been saying something like 80 to 90,000, haven't you? Or am I making that
Probably
up?
go over 100,000.
Yeah, they were talking about 140 and
180,000.
to 180. Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Barentine, thank you.
I mean, I know we have other things that we need to go on, but if we to do before the meeting. But if we're going to go ahead and do a town hall, is there some opportunity between now and then that we could go ahead and have some input as to the questions, and we could get the information that we've requested on the copy of the survey, so that we have that, so we can compare it and see whether what questions we might, and then how many non-conforming use properties didn't return their card, and how many non-conforming lost their right to be a non-conforming property even in the last 5 years. So aside from those questions, and maybe we could set some time aside to go ahead and do that, because we're not going to be able to vet it out tonight.
Okay, and actually I do like the idea of tying it to the Inglewood Citizen. So
I would delay it quite a bit. You said sooner than later. That's not
Well,
depends on what
it's
you
not
think.
sooner, but by the time we get all of these other things put together, the survey and looking at the questions, it might be that as soon as we could have it shortly after the after it comes out.
Because I'd also like to see how many people have been, I've heard from some people who believe that they've been encouraged to buy properties believing that this is going to go through. And so you have a population maybe that we're encouraging that think that if they keep pushing this, that they're going to go ahead and take a property that they purchased and then create a better investment for it. And that I don't want to skew it that way, because then they may, that kind of attitude in purchasing investment properties may tend to try and push how we handle it differently than the people who currently own properties. So I'd like to just spend a little time and do that, but I don't know if we can do it tonight.
All right, thank you. Did you have something else you want to share?
I did. Well, I just wanted to make sure, are we not there on any of these options, A through 1 through 4, even the more conservative ones too?
Well, there's a fifth one, and that's not to do it.
Yeah, yes, that is true, and I thought there was going to, I kept looking for that one going.
Okay.
That's your direction. We'd like to hear that earlier.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
so,
Obviously, we
Right.
don't know, or we wouldn't be asking for another town hall.
Right, I do think there's plenty. Mr. Powers.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of comments that some of you have made. I wanted to highlight something that Mayor Pro Tem Russell said a few minutes ago. I think it's important the next iteration of the public process here is we tell the community kind of where this policy is. And so the Planning and Zoning Commission did its work over the couple of years that it looked at it. We've obviously tried to facilitate some of that discussion and obviously place the options in front of you. You made the allusion to having the council essentially host this town hall, and I think that's a great idea because that lets the community know where this decision is essentially lying right now, and they can give you that direct feedback. We'll, of course, be there to be the technical resources, but I think at this point, another staff-driven outreach relative to ADUs may not necessarily get at where you're headed. So I think if the 6 or 7, depending on when we do it, of you are there and representing your interest in hearing more about this, I think that would go a long way in terms of clarifying from the community exactly where we are. And we'd be happy to facilitate that, but I think our billing would be is essentially you're driving the ship in terms of wanting to have that input.
Can I ask a
Okay, I
quick
appreciate
question?
that. Yes.
When did you when was the last time you discussed this with Planning and Zoning?
I believe that the last time we discussed it was after the June 13th study or open house meeting. We went and reviewed our results from that.
Have you recently given Planning and Zoning any additional information on ADUs?
No, we haven't been in contact with. They haven't had a lot of meetings actually recently. So.
Yeah, that has come up.
Well, aside from that, they haven't requested it either.
Okay.
So I think that we're assuming that the board still feels like their piece of it was propagated out to the community. And it's time for the community in combination with council to act on their recommendation.
We had people from the community come to council and say afterwards that they thought that staff had brought forward some additional comparative things like what you were talking about after it had been brought to us. In any case, if we can have all of the stuff that was, and they thought it was good. So I would agree with Councilmember Olson. I'd like that as well.
Okay.
The last point of clarification for me, and we apologize for monopolizing your time this evening, is the outreach effort. There was an allusion to the cost that we did for that second workshop. We took it upon ourselves as a department to try to maximize your direction to us to meet as many people in the community as we can. We're certainly not budgeted for that this time around. So I think for the town hall effort, we'll exploit all the usual channels that we normally do for the community participation events, but we wouldn't necessarily look for that extra expense this time around.
Okay.
I want to clarify that.
All right, thank you. And I want to make a comment. I'd like to finish this up right now. It would probably be helpful if we came to some decision also on any of these ideas that we absolutely like, so that before the town hall meeting, there would be some parameters, and we could decide that on a different evening. I would like to suggest that we look at this and bring it up at a study session, and then I do think probably if we utilize the May Inglewood Citizen, we could have everything ready by that time. So that's my suggestion. Councilmember Olson, did you have one?
Yeah, I think I just am concerned a bit about something with planning and zoning. So they haven't met since all this other information came through. You don't see anything that came through that would have changed anything that they're proposing to us? I don't,
No.
but okay, I just want to make sure that that's clear, that that's right, because the public could think, well, gosh, why didn't you take this back to them? But there's enough there to continue to support the 4 options that they gave us. So then I like your idea. I think it's a good one to say council is now sort of moving into this stage where we need to hear directly a little bit more, and I think it's a good plan to go forward with a bunch of push for it however we can afford, and then try and do it right away.
Okay.
It has to probably be mayor.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thank you. Even as we don't know the readership of our citizen, when is the exact deadline for submitting materials for publication?
I mean, actually, that
It tends to be quite a bit before.
yeah, it
the
is
publication
actually.
date.
It'll be probably early March that material will be needed to be brought in. So I think we can certainly meet that time frame. But you're absolutely right. There is a lot of lead time
Yep.
for the writing of the magazine. But it should go out in early May, just as this one is now reaching homes. The May one should be in people's homes around the same time,
Thank you.
7th, 8th, or 9th.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
We have a couple of minutes for board and commission policy training materials.
Yes, do it.
Good evening. I actually can be very brief. So my understanding was that council wanted an update on our work with boards and commissions training and eventually developing policies related to boards and commissions. We had an excellent training with staff last week to try to, I think, iron out some of the inconsistencies and how agendas were developed, when they were posted, all that kind of stuff. I think it was a good opportunity to do a refresher for open meetings law, open records law, that type of stuff. Just the items that staff needs to be aware of as staff liaisons to our boards and commissions. We are preparing a training for boards and commission members with a focus on chairpersons. We are waiting until after the month or towards the end of the month of February so that our boards and commissions can get seated, sworn in, and elect new chairs so we know who our audience is. We'll be focusing on chairpersons, again, just some of the requirements to try to hammer out some of the issues and inconsistency that we've had across the board. And so we had a good meeting, which I think will help with, or a good training with staff, and that'll lead us to a training with boards and commission members at the end of the month. Now, there's a number of outstanding items that I think need to be addressed within your policy manual. How far you get with that, that'll depend on our conversation next week as the policy and procedure discussion will continue next week on the 12th. And if we progress or you give us some consensus on some of the items that are out there related to boards and commissions, then we can certainly build that into the training. Otherwise, more or less, we'll just be using it as a refresher for boards and commission members and chairpersons on open meetings, open records, agenda setting, minutes, recording, all that kind of stuff. So, we just wanted to try to get to board and commission members when they're fresh and seated so that, as we have these new appointments that they are prepared for their work.
I'll open it up for any questions or comments. And in the meantime, I'd like to say I went to Malley Center Trust Fund Board met today, and I was very impressed. They had printed out guidelines for the meetings that really they decided 2 or 3 years ago in preparation for some of the changes. And I mean, they did address some of the changes about open meetings law and why we're doing things. So I was very impressed with that, and I was very thankful that staff had already had that meeting, because Dorothy Hargrove and Joe Sack came, and Debbie Severa, and they had already planned some of that into the agenda.
Right.
So, but I mean, I asked, and they hadn't made any changes yet. Those were the existing things on the book. So,
right. And one of the examples is for rules of procedure. We're recommending at this point that boards and commissions, if they don't have something conflicting in their bylaws, to utilize Bob's Rules of Order, because they're simple and you don't have to, go through the thick book of Robert's Rules of Order. But again, that's an example that would be nice to know if council is adopting Bob's Rules of Order, because then we know it's standard across the board. But I'm glad that they're utilizing the training.
okay, thank you. Councilmember Wilson.
I'm totally in favor of you all doing this, and supporting you in any help that you might need, and then I'd be glad to offer. I heard from people in the past, when they first get elected, they particularly feel like, oh my goodness, now what am I doing? If they've never led a meeting in a public setting like that, it's different than at work, when you can kind of just do whatever you want. And so I applaud you for putting this together, and I'd like to support in any way, whatever we can do.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other? Oh, Councilmember Barentine.
The conflicting bylaws, I mean, what I would like to see in here is that each board read their charter, the Inglewood City Charter, on how they were formed. I'm not sure that some of the bylaws have gotten way astray of what they ever had the authority or power to do, and that we have some consistency in how we handle especially alternates. I've kind of taken a look at the way some of the other cities do it, and we seem to have a little bit of a very inconsistent, and some of it, for a couple, how it came to my attention is, I think some people wanted to shut some alternates up. I mean, first of all, council put some alternates on for boards that they weren't through the years, and then all of a sudden they didn't particularly care for an alternate, so they go, well, you can't vote. Or even if, and then the purpose of having the alternate was kind of ridiculous, because part of the reason to have the alternate is so you always have a quorum, and to have a quorum, that person, in the absence of somebody else, has to be able to vote. And we've had that issue come up, especially this last 2 years, where we've had problems with the quorum. And if we're putting alternates on boards, that's supposed to help take care of that, so that gets a little crazy. At one meeting that I listened to, and I won't name it, they actually told the alternate they couldn't speak. I was like, they're a citizen. Of course they could speak. They could get in front in the podium and speak. I mean, it was kind of like, I don't know, it was kind of weird. So I greatly appreciate this training, because I think it's needed, because these boards and commissions, especially our quasi-judicial boards and commissions, play a huge role in this, and they have the authority and the power of law, some of them, and they need to follow the law. And the first thing I'd like them to know is what the charter says and what their requirements are first. And then if they wish to reinvent themselves, that's nice, but I'm not sure they have the power to do that. So they can say, here's some guidelines we'd like to do, or but the fact that some of these have gone ahead and done these bylaws or mission statements or vision statements, that has to go through council, and it has to be in compliance with the charter first. So if you could just add that piece to this to make sure that that is the foundation from which it comes from, maybe we'll have some clearer understanding.
Yeah, and just so you know, we did cover the bylaw issue with staff to say, if your body has a bylaw, review it and let the city attorney's office know of any potential conflicts. Mm-hmm. I know our city attorney is very concerned about some of the bylaws, and at your direction is currently going through, is it Chapter 2, it deals with all the boards and commissions in the charter, and in the code, and to give council some revisions here in the next couple of months.
And I don't want to give some of them the false impression that their bylaws trump they may not have ever had the weight that they think
course.
that they do. So that's, I want to try and just start from that ground up thing. So thanks for putting this together. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you and the City Attorney's Office for all the work that you're doing. I know that the board that I was at today, I think at one time they wanted to create bylaws, but they were created by ordinance. And so the city attorney told them, no, they couldn't do that. They had to stick by the ordinance. So I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. If nothing else, we will adjourn till 7 o'clock next door.